60 years after making his big screen debut in the Sandra Dee comedy Take Her, She's Mine, actor James Brolin is still thriving. Some moments change everything. No matter how strong you thought love was, James Brolin has stood by Barbra Streisand for over 2 decades through fame, family, and the weight of the spotlight. But something has shifted after a sudden turn in Barbra's health. Whispers of James stepping away have grown louder. People who know them say it wasn't an easy choice, but one that shocked everyone close to them. What happened behind closed doors that made James finally say goodbye? Join us as we explore what led James Brolin to this heartbreaking moment after his wife's tragic diagnosis. For years, James Brolin has worked in film and television. He's never chased headlines. He doesn't stir up controversy. He's not the type you expect to see on magazine covers. And neither is Barbra, at least not anymore. They've built their life in a way that shields them from chaos. Their marriage, strong for over 25 years, has stayed mostly out of the public spotlight. So, when Brolin recently withdrew, people close to them knew something wasn't right. What does it take for a man in his 80s, still healthy, still respected, and still working, to say, "No, I can't"? Especially when the job being offered is easy, high-paying, and fits his experience perfectly. In this case, it was something deeper than scheduling or preference. It was about Barbra. Although no formal statement has been released, those paying attention have seen the signs. James has stopped taking calls from producers. He's rarely seen outside of their Montecito estate. People who once worked with him say he's no longer interested in reading scripts. And insiders, those who know the couple well, say he's devoting all his energy to staying home and making sure Barbra is comfortable. He's stepping away because something is unfolding behind closed doors that matters more than anything else ever could. The word people use is devotion. They've always kept their private life sacred. From the beginning, they made sure their home was a safe place. No prying eyes, no attention-seeking. But now that space has taken on a deeper role. It's become a retreat, a shield, and a place where love is doing the heavy lifting. For James, the decision to stay wasn't really a decision at all. It was instinct. After years of commitment, laughter, struggle, and strength, he's chosen to stay right where he's needed. His professional legacy is solid. His reputation is clean. But in this moment, the most powerful thing he can do is something no one will see on a screen. So the question is, what really makes a man walk away after decades of career momentum and the public stage he's worked so long to stand on? Before James Brolin became the man sitting beside Barbra Streisand through the toughest chapter of their lives, he was just Craig Kenneth Brolin, a skinny, quiet kid growing up in Westwood Village, Los Angeles. His father, Henry, worked as a building contractor. His mother, Helen, had spent a little time as a film extra, but her world was far from red carpets. What James remembers most from those early years was structure. His father didn't hand out compliments easily. He expected results. Hard work was non-negotiable, and emotions were better left unspoken. That upbringing planted something in James, a kind of steel underneath the surface. It also made him curious about the world beyond the house he grew up in. While other kids were dreaming about baseball or becoming doctors, James was building a world in his head. He fell in love with the movies. In particular, he was fascinated with animals, airplanes, and how things moved on camera. He took apart model planes just to put them back together better. He recorded his own sound effects using a tape recorder. And quietly, he began to imagine himself in the movies. But Hollywood wasn't waiting with open arms. After changing his name to James Brolin in his early 20s, he started auditioning. It didn't go well. Casting agents told him he was too tall, too stiff, and too shy. For years, the answer was always no. He was invisible. The city didn't notice him. And in those long stretches of silence between auditions, he questioned everything. Still, something made him stay. He refused to give up. And just when it seemed like nothing would ever shift, he landed a small part on a medical drama called Marcus Welby, MD. Week by week, his character, Dr. Stephen Kiley, began connecting with audiences. Viewers liked him. They trusted him. For the first time, producers saw something bankable in James Brolin. The show became a surprise hit, and Brolin won an Emmy for his performance. That role stabilized his entire life. He finally had a place, and with that place came peace. But James never let success define him. While many actors chased the next big movie or lived for the tabloid spotlight, Brolin stepped back. He shifted from leading man to character roles. He experimented with directing. He took parts that gave him time with his kids, not just more screen time. And even when he starred in major films like Westworld or Traffic, he did so without turning himself into a brand. He worked because he loved the work, and fame was never the goal. By the time he met Barbra, James had seen it all: success, rejection, and reinvention. And that journey shaped the man he became in marriage. He knew what mattered. He had already learned that the strongest people aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones who endure the storm in silence and still keep going. That's why his recent decision to walk away from work speaks volumes. He's saying goodbye to the stage he once fought so hard to stand on because something greater has taken its place. And as we reveal next, if you knew where Barbra Streisand came from, you'll understand exactly why James Brolin would make that choice. Barbra Streisand was just 15 months old when her father, Emmanuel, died suddenly on August 4, 1943, from complications related to an epileptic seizure. She never got to know him, only the silence he left behind. Her mother, Diana, was left to raise Barbra and her older brother on her own, and it wasn't easy. They were poor. They moved often. And the grief in that household just hovered unspoken over everything. Barbra grew up hungry, not just for food, but for love, safety, and attention. She later said she always felt like an outsider. She wasn't the pretty one, not in the way magazines defined it. She was skinny, had a nose people made fun of, and a voice that didn't quite match her size. But she also had something else: awareness. She knew, even as a teenager, that she saw things differently. She could imitate people. She could mimic feelings. And when she sang, something cracked open inside her that had always been locked away. By the time she was a young adult, Barbra was trying to escape invisibility. Singing in nightclubs wasn't glamorous, but it gave her attention. Audiences leaned in. They felt her pain, her edge, and her longing. That was someone who had lived through something. She didn't belt notes to show off. She let them carry the weight of everything she had lost and everything she still wanted. And that emotional honesty set her apart. She didn't look like the typical Hollywood starlet, and for a long time that worked against her. Casting agents called her too ethnic, too strange, not commercial. But those same rejections are what pushed her to take control of her own image. She wore what she liked, even if it didn't follow the trend. In every way, she broke the mold, and eventually she became the mold. By the time Funny Girl hit Broadway and later the big screen, the world stopped laughing at her and started cheering. But Barbra didn't stop with singing and acting. She wanted to tell stories, not just play a role in someone else's. That's why she fought for behind-the-scenes control, writing, producing, and directing. At a time when men ran the studios and women played along, she pushed back. She became the first woman to write, produce, direct, and star in a major studio film with Yentl. She wanted to shape what people were seeing. That meant constant battles. Studios doubted her. Critics second-guessed her. People in power told her she was too controlling, but she never backed down. She earned 2 Academy Awards and multiple Emmys and Grammys because she outlasted every door that tried to close in her face. And she brought that same strength into her personal life. When she met James Brolin later in life, she had already done all that on her own. What she found was a man who didn't try to dim her light. He didn't get threatened by her power or overwhelmed by her fame. He respected the fortress she had built around herself, and slowly he was allowed in. That bond is what makes her illness now even harder to watch from the outside. Barbra has always been the one in control, the one solving the problem, rewriting the ending. But health doesn't care about strength or legacy. For someone who spent her entire life building a voice the world couldn't ignore, losing control of her body must feel like the cruelest twist. Still, for those who truly know her story, they understand that Barbra Streisand doesn't go down without a fight, and neither does the man who has loved her through every version of herself. Barbra Streisand didn't expect much when she agreed to that blind date in 1996. A friend had insisted she meet this man named James Brolin. She barely knew who he was, except that he'd done some acting and carried himself like a cowboy. But when James rang the doorbell and she opened the door, the first words out of her mouth weren't exactly romantic. She stared at his freshly trimmed hair and said, "Who screwed up your hair?" That was Barbra, blunt, honest, and not trying to impress anyone. But instead of being put off, James laughed. That's when she noticed his eyes. He looked warm, kind, and unshaken. And for once, she didn't feel like she had to perform. Their connection was built slowly. They spent hours talking. She found herself asking him deep questions, and he didn't flinch when she challenged him. He met her with calm, with steadiness, and with no ego. It was the first time she felt she could put her defenses down without losing herself. But Barbra didn't say yes to marriage right away. Far from it. James proposed not once, not twice, but 3 times before she finally said yes. She was being careful. Her life had been shaped by early abandonment. Her father died before she could remember him. Her childhood was unstable, and fame only made trusting people harder. She had built her life alone, and letting someone into that world wasn't easy. James understood. He didn't rush her. He waited patiently each time. That consistency, that loyalty, is what finally got through to her. On July the 1st, 1998, they got married in a small ceremony at her Malibu estate. It was intimate, emotional, and deeply personal. They both cried. But merging their lives wasn't just about wedding vows. James had children from previous marriages. Barbra had always kept a tight circle. She didn't open up easily, even to people who loved her. And yet somehow they made it work. She welcomed his kids with warmth, but never pretended to be someone she wasn't. She showed up with honesty, and over time they became family. What helped was how they respected each other's differences. For example, they have separate bathrooms. It sounds simple, but for 2 strong personalities, that little bit of personal space matters. He loves the outdoors, gardening, fixing things, and walking the dogs. She loves design, photography, and silence. At home, they don't step on each other's worlds. They make space for them. They also share a deep love for nature. Their home is a sanctuary. They take care of rescue dogs. They walk the grounds together as 2 people who finally found something solid. What sets their marriage apart is how they've held on to mutual respect. There's no spotlight competition, no tug-of-war over attention. James never tried to overshadow Barbra, and she never tried to shrink him. He once said, "I love everything she does. I love her choices." That understanding is rare, especially in a world where power couples often crash under pressure. Their bond has lasted more than 25 years, and it's because they gave each other permission to be imperfect. They had learned early on not to let the world define them. And as we're about to reveal, as they face their toughest season yet, the strength of their shared history is being tested in ways no one saw coming. Barbra Streisand and James Brolin have never lived by Hollywood's rules. Both had faced their share of judgment and misunderstanding long before they ever found each other. But together, they built something that didn't need headlines or awards. Barbra has long been labeled difficult, a word often tossed at women who dared to ask for more control. From her earliest days in Hollywood, she refused to stay quiet in the face of condescension. Whether it was a director dismissing her input or critics attacking her appearance, she stood firm. That didn't change after marriage, when she pushed for creative control over her concerts or called out political hypocrisy in interviews. The backlash came fast. But behind her every time stood James. He was quieter about it, but just as fierce in his loyalty. James didn't need to be in front of the cameras to feel relevant. After his early fame on Marcus Welby, MD, he could have clung to the spotlight. Instead, he took roles that interested him, directed, and turned his focus inward toward home and toward family. But with that shift came its own kind of criticism. Life didn't go easy on them. Over the years, they lost friends, mentors, and family members. Barbra was devastated when Marvin Hamlisch, the composer she'd considered a musical soulmate, passed away in 2012. James, too, felt the sting of aging more privately. He watched colleagues fade, felt projects dry up, and dealt with the kind of silence that can unsettle even the most grounded actor. Health scares came too, but they leaned in. Barbra has spoken about the stress that used to keep her off the stage. When she returned for major performances, it was because James nudged her to keep going. When she performed at Hyde Park in 2019 to a crowd of 65,000, James stood in the wings. When James worked behind the camera or took on quieter roles, Barbra never questioned his choices. She praised his work publicly and fiercely protected his peace. Their dynamic was built not on grand gestures, but small, repeated acts of faith. The turning point came quietly, but those closest to Barbra Streisand noticed the change. To those outside the home, it might have looked like retirement, but it was a decision made from the gut. In the decades they'd been together, Barbra had often taken the lead in public, on stage, on political platforms, in creative decisions. But in private, they'd always been a team. So when her health began to fade, James stepped into the role of a caregiver. Friends say that James has never looked more serious. You can tell he's carrying a lot, and still he won't talk about himself. It's all about making her comfortable. There are days when Barbra is herself, and there are days when she's not. On those days, James becomes the protector, shielding her from too many visitors, too much noise, and too many decisions. Caregiving, especially for someone you've shared a life with for decades, is emotional, spiritual, and even existential. Watching someone you love fade, even slowly, means watching parts of yourself fade too. For James, who once stood beside a woman with boundless energy and conviction, the contrast is heavy, but he never lets her see the weight. To Barbra, he remains steady and supportive. Insiders close to the couple say James has stopped attending most industry events. He's declined invitations, turned down late-stage opportunities, and cancelled scheduled appearances without fanfare. Those who've known James a long time say this isn't surprising. He's always been devoted. He never needed the spotlight the way others did. Even when he was most visible on red carpets and press tours, he was at his most comfortable when he was home. And now that instinct has taken full form. He's simply being the man Barbra always said he was, strong when it counts most. What makes their story so different is the depth of it. They've laughed and built and disagreed and walked away only to come back closer. They've supported each other through career highs and personal heartbreaks. But this chapter, the hardest one, is where their love has taken on new meaning. What do you think about James Brolin's decision? Would you make the same sacrifice for someone you love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more.